goes ahead with it, won't be able to share news content with each other, and they won't be able to find news content.
So media outlets lose reach, Facebook users lose that viewing content, as you say, and we're in the middle of a pandemic, and Facebook loses data in this, don't they? And news content would have to be pretty rich data.
Yeah, so a third of Australians actually get their news from Facebook. So an awful lot of us are using that platform for news content. And Facebook gets quite a lot of engagement data about us. It profiles our behaviour. It feeds us advertising. It's got quite a little business going there around news content. And it's shooting itself in the foot, in a way, by pulling our ability to share news from Facebook.
Who loses the most if this does eventuate?
Well, we all lose, as I see it. News outlets will lose because they won't get the referrals and the traffic that is generated by Facebook and Google in this instance. And users will lose out. We won't be able to share news content with the people that we love on Facebook.
Do you think Facebook is bluffing?
They might go ahead with it. They might go ahead with it just to prove how much it will hurt us.
But the ACCC has clearly hit a nerve, and Facebook would be worried about the precedent that this would set, wouldn't they?
Yes, absolutely. So other countries in the world have actually tried to get Facebook and Google to pay for news content. They haven't been successful in that regard. Google and Facebook have always found a way to get around it. So if Australia is successful, if this legislation is successful, it will set a global precedent. And other countries will look to Australia and say, oh, look, it's working in Australia, and we've got news outlets that are in need of, that are struggling at the moment. So why don't we do that too?
Now, you've noted that Google has stopped short of pulling news content altogether and going for the nuclear option. Are you suggesting in that instead of fighting together, Google and Facebook could play off against each other?
I don't know that they've actually been communicating all that much over these past couple of weeks, because Facebook's been quiet all this time, and Google's really been fighting the battle itself in public. So they have different agendas, but they are united on this front.
And how do you think this is going to play out?
I don't know, but I know that it will definitely not be beneficial for Australians if we're not able to share news content on Facebook.
Dr. Belinda Barnett, Senior Lecturer in Media at Swinburne University. Thank you for joining us. Overseas Democratic presidential candidate Joe Biden has accused President Donald Trump of sowing chaos as protests continue across the United States. In a rare public appearance on the campaign trail, Mr. Biden was heckled as he delivered pizzas to first responders in Pittsburgh. Earlier, he gave a speech in the battleground state to counter Donald Trump's accusations that he's weak on crime.
You know, he may believe mouthing the words law and order makes him strong, but his failure to call on his own supporters to stop acting as an armed militia in this country shows how weak he is.
President Trump hit back, saying the Democrats had lost control of what he described as radical left maniacs. He also appeared to support claims that a 17-year-old who shot dead 2 protesters in Wisconsin was acting in self-defence. The French President Emmanuel Macron has arrived in Lebanon for the second time in less than a month for talks with the newly appointed Prime Minister. Lebanon's former ambassador to Germany, Mustafa Adib, has taken on the role with the backing of most MPs. He toured some of the neighbourhoods damaged by the explosion at the Beirut port and has pledged to form a new government in record time. The previous administration resigned following the blast that killed at least 200 people. Mr. Macron will hold talks with the new leader on strategies to tackle widespread corruption and the country's economic crisis. Australians stranded overseas by coronavirus are continuing to battle cancelled flights and exorbitant airfares in their attempt to return home. So parents in London are taking things into their own hands. They're hoping to charter a plane so that they can introduce their newborn babies to family in Australia. Nick Dole reports.
Meet 4-month-old Callan, 4-month-old Ailish And Charlie, who's just 7 weeks old. They're just a few of London's lockdown babies, and now their Australian parents want to introduce them to their families back home.
You're being robbed of so many just incredible memories of her that you want to share with your family and you can't. This is my daughter Ailish.
When Kylie McCrossan posted this video to social media, she soon realised she wasn't alone.
Outside of all of the babies that we'd like to take home, there are so many Australians still in London at the moment who can't get home.
Australia's caps on international arrivals have turned air travel into a virtual lottery, with thousands of passengers competing for the right to return. Melbourne's not accepting any arrivals. Sydney only allows 350 per day, while Perth, Brisbane and Adelaide each have a weekly allocation of around 500. So Kylie McCrossan's started a campaign to fill a charter flight with young Australian families.
65 people registered, so that's over 60 families, about 120 people, 70 babies, so it'll be a really noisy flight.
They're getting quotes from airlines, but what they really need is an assurance from the government they'll be able to land. For many families, returning earlier simply wasn't an option.
The thought of getting on a plane, I don't think physically I could have done that. I was 8 months pregnant, but my partner's English, my life is here, my work is here. It just, you can't just suddenly click your fingers and go back to Australia.
So what are your options if you're an Australian hoping to leave London? Well, one-way economy fares in early September range from about $2,600 to nearly $25,000. There are some reasonable fares available around Christmas time, but just because the airlines are selling these tickets doesn't mean they'll actually let the passengers on the plane. Booking business or first-class fares can improve a passenger's chances, but many travellers can't afford that. These parents don't need luxury, just a plane to fly their precious cargo home. Nick Dole, ABC News, London.
The wife of late AFL great Danny Frawley has revealed the St Kilda legend was suffering from a neurological disorder at the time of his death. Frawley's wife Anita said an analysis of the former Richmond coach's brain showed signs of stage 2 chronic encephalopathy, or CTE. It's an illness linked to concussions and brain trauma. I'm joined now by neurophysicist and Associate Professor at La Trobe University, Dr Alan Pearce. Dr Pearce, Danny Frawley is the second AFL player to be diagnosed after Graham polypharma last year. What is CTE?
CTE stands for chronic traumatic encephalopathy, and it's a neurodegenerative disease that is part of the dementia family of diseases. But unlike the better-known Alzheimer's disease, CTE is sort of linked to trauma of the brain, because the way that it starts and the way that it progresses, it starts from the outside of the brain and progresses, whereas Alzheimer's, for example, starts from the inside of the brain and then progresses out. So there are some key differences.
And is repetitive head injury the only known risk factor for the development of CTE?
Currently, the emerging evidence that we have worldwide suggests that it is due to trauma and repeated trauma, not just from concussions, but what we call subconcussive impacts. So these are smaller hits, repetitive over a career of an athlete, for example, that contributes to increased risk of CTE.
Now, Danny Frawley has been diagnosed posthumously, and that is the only option at this point, isn't it? But what behavioural symptoms may raise suspicion that someone may have it?
That's correct. So, CTE can only be diagnosed to look at the patterning of the CTE degeneration of the brain, but certainly during there are changes in behaviour and mood. What you find are these uncharacteristic, as family members say, that they're not the same person anymore, and this could be depression, it could be anxiety, it could be irritability, impulse control, mood changes. So there's a range of things that can be seen, that people start to question that something's not quite right.
But not everyone who plays contact sport or has gotten repeated concussions will get it, will they?
That's what we're trying to find out with the research, is why some people may end up with CTE and some people may not. Just for example, with the Australian rules cohort that we've had which is only 3 publicly at the moment. We've had 2 confirmed with CTE, and that was, Polypharma in February and the report today. But there's, conversely, there's a West Australian football player who showed changes but didn't show CTE patterning. So, this is what we're trying to find out, and this is why we are calling for, research support, but also pledges from athletes and their families as well.
And Danny Frawley is another high-profile case, and that no doubt generates a lot of interest in the research. And do you think that will lead to more answers?
We hope so, and we hope that it leads to more people supporting the research, because we do need to, see, I guess, more research done, not just in the pathology of CTE, but also trying to understand the changes, in behaviour and mood and impairments in mental capacities and cognitive changes as well. So it's the whole gamut. But we also want to be able to educate people, and we also want to change the culture around head injuries and concussions. That it's not a badge of honour, and it's not a sign of weakness if someone is concussed and doesn't come off.
And just finally, is there much known about women and CTE? Because AFL and other contact sports are increasing in popularity.
Well, this is something that we are certainly trying to address, just even in concussions research generally, that there's a real disparity between male and female research studies. And with the rise of women's contact sports worldwide, that's something that we need to be looking at. And the United States are a decade ahead of us, and they've got some studies into women with long-term outcomes as we speak.
Dr. Alan Pearce, thanks for joining us.
You're welcome.
Now let's get the sports news with Louise Ransom. And